There is a place, tucked under my mattress, where ideas that no one dared to dream await. A place where imagination meets boredom, where speculation meets bullshitting, where too much free time meets awesome drawings of Deadpool riding the Millennium Falcon chased by TIE fighters holding 2 swords! This place is known as the Rubbish Log. Every month we get a ton of trailers dumped on us. Also trailers for trailers, which is very annoying. But in the past few months alone, we've seen trailers for the most highly anticipated movies we've seen in a long time. All for the year 2015, which is jam-packed with really high-caliber sequels to the biggest franchises of all time. First off, Avengers Age of Ultron. Second off, Avengers Age of Ultron. Jurassic World, which I've been waiting for since I was 6 years old. Also coming out that year are Mockingjay Part 2, Fast and Furious 7, Ted 2, and Mission Impossible 5. Now, any one of those movies would by all means rule the box office in their own year, except all those movies will come down with a serious case of Star Wars. Side effects include franchise reinvigoration, toy sales, nostalgia, huge box office return, and the ability to make any competition look like a Bollywood movie. Oh, and there's a new Terminator, which is cool, I guess. Does anyone care? So yeah, we get it. Lots of damn sequels. More so than even the past few years. The difference between the years 2015 and 2013, which had a lot of new original properties, is pretty big. I'm not saying Hollywood can't come up with new ideas, and neither am I talking smack about sequels. I enjoy sequels as much as anyone else. The question I'm posing is it possible to plant new seeds for new properties? The rate at which they're put out is a lot lower. Are audiences to blame for not seeing them, or are studios to blame for not putting them out? In 2013, we saw a cloud of a lot of new properties, which I will define as not being a sequel, prequel, remake, reboot, or adaptation. Pacific Rim, Oblivion, Elysium, 47 Ronin, and After Earth to name a few. Most of these films performed mediocre at best at the box office, and others downright tanked. Part of it could be attributed to mixed reception, or that people didn't recognize these movies. But when you break it down, these films weren't terribly original. The paradox is this: being a new property is a risky move in of itself. So the studios push these films to look and feel familiar, and make them really formulaic so it's less risky and more appealing. What you end up with, usually, is really, really generic. Blah 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 aliens, blah 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 Earth, blah 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 Tom Cruise, blah 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 war, blah 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 Jane Smith. That's not to say all these films are generic, but that's usually the payoff, and that is sometimes reflected with how these films were critically received, which is also a factor in how the film does. But mostly, these films didn't really stand out to audiences. Like a few people I spoke to said, they look like video games, and not really good ones at that. So yeah, these films weren't all that well received, and Hollywood mistakes that for, we just want more sequels, which is entirely untrue. After the massive success of such films as The Lord of the Rings, The Dark Knight, The Avengers, which were some of the most profitable movies ever made, we've seen them take geek properties a little more seriously, which is where we're going with a lot of our new properties. Adaptations for the longest time were for nothing more than brand recognition. If nothing else, it will plug into a pre-existing fan base who will generate hype for the movie, and that'll get people curious if nothing else. But these properties have fans for a reason. They have to have some appeal, don't they? With thousands of properties to choose from, the cream rises to the top. They have what a lot of new property films are lacking: personality, distinction, and pre-thought-out stories, though the bane of adapting properties is having a Harry Potter complex and depending on its franchise potential instead of standing on its own, which often fails either because the source material wasn't that original to begin with, or because they're abandoning the appeal of the source material to pursue a current trend, like the glut of films in 2013 that wanted to be the new Twilight, The Host, Mortal Instruments. Fans are entitled to shit, but they know the appeal of their property more than anyone else. Sometimes they're wrong about some choices. Heath Ledger is a Joker. People freaked out about that, believe it or not. And sometimes they're completely right. Victor Von Doom is not a fucking blogger, Fox. You already fucked him up once by making him a corporate lunatic whose only motivation is to cause property damage and drop shitty puns. Is it too much to ask to see him as a cold-blooded, genius Latvian dictator we love sashaying on the big screen? Urgh! Sorry, tangent, but you get it. Though sometimes creative liberty should be taken, but only when it's needed. The formula of book adaptations, one that has proven successful, is that it should be about 80% of its source material. It should capture the spirit, important plot beats, and its characters and relationships. 10% of new material should serve only to accomplish that in 2 hours or less, such as finding more organic ways to explain history through dialogue, like in Game of Thrones, or creating a character for the main character to speak of instead of having an internal monologue, like Coraline. The remaining 10% should belong with a strong creative team, who deserve a little input every now and then. Comic adaptations are pretty different and should follow a similar principle. They should follow 70% of their source material, because often there's hell of a lot of backstory and history, especially when it comes to superheroes, and they should still strive for the core essence of the characters and relationships. The foundation should reconcile with the audience of the time. A lot of comics were created in the 60s and are a bit dated, and deserve a small update, such as Spider-Man getting bitten by a genetically altered spider instead of a radioactive one, or Tony Stark getting captured in Afghanistan instead of Vietnam. While I admire a lot of screenwriters for developing original stories for these characters, or sometimes, I'm more impressed when they find ways to combine events and stories from their long history. The Dark Knight Rises combines parts of Nightfall, The Dark Knight Returns, and No Man's Land, or Captain America the Winter Soldier takes parts of The Winter Soldier, Civil War, and The Ultimates. So more work needs to be put into the material, so 15% translation, 15% creative input. It was Richard Donner, after all, who redefined Superman, even influencing the comic itself. Basically, the formula we're seeing perfected with Marvel Studios should be the standard. It's debatable whether or not video games have potentials for movies. They're a nut Hollywood has yet to crack. Personally, I'd say they should follow a similar principle to comic book movies, but that's a discussion I'm saving for another episode. Though I will say, nobody's asking for a Space Invaders movie. Nobody. So, we've got new properties through adaptations, but no real new properties in the strictest sense. So how do you get to the point where studios can give over strong creative control and still provide a moderate budget to a filmmaker with a risky idea? While I'm against a high degree of studio interference, the opposite extreme would be a batshit crazy creator. The Matrix sequels. Enough said. And I believe there's a magical mixture. There are directors and writers who know exactly how and when to keep audiences interested, and who know the right beats of their story by heart, which is an incredibly rare mixture. Often projects of such high caliber are given to directors with a consistent track record, like James Cameron or Steven Spielberg from his prime. We see very few of those these days, and it's kinda hard to have consistently good films with a studio breathing down your neck. A good model to follow is to give small budgets to these directors, but give complete creative freedom, and let them prove themselves through their usage, and determine their future based on the reception both audience and critical. Possibly give them a property to adapt after a few films, and see how they do with what they're given, like with Christopher Nolan and Batman Begins. Then, when trust is achieved, maybe give them the movie they wanted to make since forever with minimal interference. Maybe even let them have an R rating. It's a formula that's catching on a little bit, and I really hope it bears fruit and gives us a new generation of great, innovative filmmakers. I am, of course, being really optimistic here. Realistically, they'll be forced into creating new properties after a few sequels bomb. That or they'll just implode and we'll move on to holograms or something. Keep investing on those VR headsets, people. So that's my 2 cents on the matter. Hey, if you like the show, follow me. On the next episode, I'm going to talk about The Hobbit. And where's my 3-hour cut? Please check out the Theta comic, follow this channel, like me, and keep logging on. Wow, worst send-off ever. Keep logging on.